Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 17. My next featured guest is Huda Al-Marashi. She is the Iraqi-American author of First Comes Marriage, My Not-So-Typical American Love Story, a book the Washington Post called a charming, funny, heartbreaking memoir of faith, family, and the journey to love. If Jane Austen had grown up as a first-gen daughter of Iraqi parents in the 1990s, she might have written this. Excerpts from this memoir have also been anthologized in Love, Inshallah, The Secret Love Lives of Muslim American Women, Becoming, What Makes a Woman, and Beyond Belief, The Secret Lives of Women in Extreme Religion. Her other writing has appeared in The Washington Post, The LA Times, Al Jazeera, Vita Review, Refinery 29, The Rumpus, The Offing, and elsewhere. She is the recipient of a Cuyahoga County Creative Workshop Fellowship, an Aspen Summer Words Emerging Writer Fellowship. Huda currently resides in California with her husband and 3 children. Visit her at hudaalmarashi.com. Please welcome my next featured guest, Huda Al-Marashi. Hi, Huda. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Christina.
Well, I'm so honored that you decided to come on the show, and because I understand you have a fantastic book out. But before we talk about your book, I would like to get to know you a little more, like I always do with my writers and artists that do come on. Can you tell us where you were born and where you grew up?
Yeah, I was actually born in Michigan, and my parents didn't live there very long. They're Iraqi immigrants, and my father was doing different kinds of medical training in the U.S., and after I was born, he actually I have an older brother, but they felt like they didn't want to raise a daughter in America. So they packed up and they tried living back in the Middle East. But instead of going back to Iraq, they went to the United Arab Emirates, where a lot of my family had been settling. Mm-hmm. And but they didn't last there very long either. They were only there, I think, less than a year. And I was very young, so I don't have any memories of this time period. But then from what they tell me, my father wasn't comfortable practicing medicine in the UAE. It was just so different from how how he had been trained in the U.S. and the level of medical records that they kept. And so he got a job opportunity in California, and we moved here, and we moved to California in 1979, and my parents stayed. They're still in the same town that they moved in. So I grew up in Monterey, California. It was just a small tourist town, and there weren't a lot of Arab Americans in that community, or Muslims from that shared our same religion, for that matter. And so I really did grow up in this kind of isolation, and that did really shape my identity.
I see. Yes, I can imagine. So now I've read a little bit of your book excerpt, First Comes Marriage, and I was really intrigued how your story pulled me in. And the very interesting part is the humanizing viewpoint of your experience. And
thank you.
Yeah. And also that I also want to say that, when we think about memoirs, we think, it's someone's experience, correct? So,
right.
But now writing a memoir is different, like saying writing a biography, because from what I've understand, taking creative writing courses also is that you also want to employ fictional devices, so that's where you get the tension, you want to get some character development in there as well, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what I see. That's from my when I read books and things like that. That's how I look at it.
Yes.
And it's wonderful that I was like so already just by the first few paragraphs, just really wanting to learn so much more and get into your book. Yes, and absolutely.
I don't think I sent you even... you saw the first 2 chapters, but I don't think that included my author's note. And one of the things that I said right off the bat is that memoir is this kind of interesting genre, right, where we're telling a true story, but by virtue of what we choose to include and exclude, it's almost an act of fiction. Yes. Because we're just looking at one aspect of our lives and telling it through this lens. But if I chose to frame this story in any different way or focus on a different relationship or a different time period, you would come out with a completely different version of events.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But see, the tricky thing about, because I thought about, doing something like that, memoir, and it's like, how do I tell something, a story about my family without pissing people off?
Absolutely. Memoir is tough. Memoir is a tough genre. I think it's such a valid concern. We all have those fears. I don't think that we're necessarily, that memoirists are more brave than any kind of other author. I think we just are compelled by a certain kind of questions, and we look at our life's experiences and we're interested in these greater thematic elements and kind of looking at this question of how did I get here? And I think memoirists really believe that our personal experience is informative of a larger, more universal experience. So I wrote this not really out of this compulsion to share my life as much as I wanted to illuminate these things that I saw as trends that I was seeing in my community, but I didn't feel like I had the right to tell somebody else's story here. And at the same time, I also didn't want to fictionalize it because I felt like the true story has a different kind of weight to it. So I felt this compulsion, like that I had to tell a true story, that I wanted to look at it through that lens, but it didn't make it any easier. And I was very concerned about my family's reaction. And
how was your family's reaction?
So they surprised me. I will say that. One of the very early pieces of advice I got, and I still consider it one of the best pieces of advice I got, was to write with the door closed first. And I took that really to heart. And you know what? And it makes a lot of sense, because why would you go, we revise so much and so much of it ends on the cutting floor. Why open the door too early and show family members what you've written if it may not ever make it into a final draft? And at the same time, when you let that opinion in too early, it could very easily derail you. And And it's amazing. We're very, very sensitive and fragile when we first start crafting our stories. And I think any kind of negative feedback too early, it's dangerous. It can really throw you off track. So I took that advice really seriously, and I had a solid draft that I was committed to before I even let my husband read it. And And before I let him read it, I kind of had this, it's all angsty, but this kind of angsty realization that I could survive it would hurt if other family members were angry or cut me off or something for what I had done or for what I had written. But if my husband did, my family life as I knew it would fall apart. And so that he was going to be my first reader, and that if he was okay with what I had done, that I rationalized that I could deal with everyone else. I could face the rest. So that's what I did. I waited until I had a real draft that I was ready to start submitting places, and I let him read it. And I'll tell you, he's not a fast reader. He's a slow reader. And those few weeks that he was reading were incredibly uncomfortable for me. And you know how hard it is, like when somebody's reading something you've written, you kind of watch their faces. And, I was just ready to just scream from the discomfort of it. But we had a really honest conversation afterwards, and I really tried to make him see what I was doing with the book, that it really wasn't about us, but it was about the larger conversation, that I was really trying to normalize a certain experience for other women like myself, so I'm kind of telling this challenging this idea that I had inherited growing up about the arranged marriage story. I had grown up in the U.S. with this one story of how Muslim girls get married, but on the other hand, there was this story of Western expectations that that was all I had seen growing up, was what I had seen on film and on television.
Right. And you did explain that in the first couple of paragraphs.
In the first couple of chapters, right?
Yes.
So I knew there was other women in this position who were going to be navigating this kind of this cross-cultural conflict of expectations. And at the same time, I felt like there was another population of women who also, like myself, found themselves married. And it was their very, very first relationship. They'd had no boyfriends before. And they went from like the first time they held hands with somebody to their first kiss to their first marriage. All within a matter of time. And, I think like practicing Muslim Americans are in this funny position where we're young to be getting married, but a little bit older to be in our first relationship. So I told him, I think this story could be helpful to other couples like ourselves. And it would be, I really, as somebody who loves books and as a reader, I feel like everybody deserves to see their experience in a story. And he supported me in that vision, but I think he still also hoped that it would never get picked up because, these things take forever and years had passed. And so, he kind of just gave me a passive sort of blessing, and I started submitting it. And in many ways, he was right, because it didn't get picked up right away. And I was submitting to agents for several years, and I didn't get signed by anybody, but I was getting feedback and invitations to resubmit along the way. And one of the agents that I had reached out to told me, your opening pages are some of the most striking pages I've seen in a long time, but it's just too long. And now that I know what the real target word count for a manuscript is, especially for a first book, I'm almost embarrassed that I did start querying with such a long manuscript. My manuscript was 120,000 words.
But who knew there was this strict cookie cutter for that? It's
and that's the thing that I think is really important for authors who are trying to get their work out there to realize, is that the rejections are hard and they hurt your feelings and you have to lick your wounds after them, but they're also a roadmap and they give you a guide of what to do. And this is kind of how you learn what the industry is looking for. And, and she told me, if you can get this down into the 80 to 90,000 word range, send it back to me. And I was hearing that from more than one place. And she recommended me to a developmental editor that she'd worked with in the past. And I consulted with that editor. And then it took me another year and a half to make those revisions. I mean, it's amazing how long it can take to make thoughtful cuts.
Now, when you say year and a half, was that year and a half back and forth with your editor?
How it worked was, I submitted my manuscript to her. She gave me the feedback on it. And then it took me a year and a half from the time I had her feedback in hand to actually sit and implement. She had suggested.
I see what you mean. Yes.
And you know how it is with a longer manuscript, because once you change one thing, it's kind of like you broke this puzzle, and then you have to put all these pieces
exactly. I can relate to that. Yeah,
it kind of unravels.
Let me ask you, how much did you noodle on a paragraph?
Goodness. I mean, I could spend hours, I could spend my whole writing day. So basically my writing routine is I write when my kids are in school. And so I could spend the entire school day just wiggling one paragraph around, trying to make sure it was saying exactly what I wanted to say. I called that revision, that was almost like my thinking revision. It involved a lot of thought, because this was the revision where her real takeaway nugget of advice to me is that I hadn't honed in on my narrative arc. What was this driving question or theme that was carrying the story forward? And it's so funny, you could live and breathe and work a manuscript for so many years and still not really know exactly what you are trying to do. What are you trying to say? So that was my thinking revision, where I had to go back and really, really ask myself, what am I trying to say here? And is in each chapter of my book saying it? Is it driving the manuscript forward? Am I really doing what I think I'm doing? And I literally outlined my own manuscript, because it's like you don't always know exactly what you're doing. And I went and I outlined each scene. And then I went and forced myself to ask myself those questions. Was each scene driving the emotional truth of the story forward? Well,
I have to say, the pages you forwarded to me, the first few chapters, I was intrigued by the powerful character of your mother, your description of her, and the cultural divide that, you growing up in the United States and in her experience. Do you happen to have that manuscript in front of you by chance?
I have my book in front of me.
Yeah, I would love you to read this segment. I think this one is, let me see if it's the same page number. Sure. I want to say it's it says here on page 19.
Okay, yeah, it's the same.
Okay. I guess right there where it says the problem with the women.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
The problem with the women in this country is they expect too much. Mama would often say to me while getting ready for work. They want love, they want passion, and they want it to last forever. Your father is a good man. He encouraged me to go back to school. Not every man would put up with his wife working and studying. If you want to start believing in this country's "what about me" garbage, there's no end to it. When Mama arrived in the United States in 1972, she was 18 years old. She didn't drive, speak English, or have a high school diploma. Baba urged her to go back to school right after my brother was born, and from then on, she'd always worked and studied, earning first her GED, then 2 different associate's degrees, then a bachelor's in nursing. Eventually, she'd earn a master's and a doctorate of nurse practice. Wow. She often said she would have gone to medical school had there been one in town. Did you want me to keep going, or? Yeah,
no. I mean, okay. So the impetus, I mean, her desire to, pursue her education and just keep learning. How much did that affect you growing up?
Oh my goodness. It was one of the biggest influences of my life. And, some people have said in, conversations about the book, like that they think my mom was much older because of her kind of old world ideas. But, she was really young. She was a very young mom. And I think at the age that, primary, the book is a lot about my wedding and in those wedding years, she's like my age now. She was only 23 when she had me. So when I was getting married, she was only 43 years old. And, in our household, I think I have that one line in the book too, where it wasn't like we were offered one path over another. Yes, they wanted us to get married and to have our families, but it wasn't, they still wanted us to excel and to have our careers and to do well in school. And my mom has always told me that she really, really wanted us to be able to support herself. She would always say a woman should have a way to take care of herself. You shouldn't be dependent on your spouse. And I mean, I think she even worries about me now because I'm a writer and I don't make any money. And I think she still has this hope, like, could you please just go get a real job so I know that you are.
Oh, but she doesn't know how successful you've come. I mean, you're a published author through a great publishing house. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I think this is all that part of that bigger cultural story too, right? Where writing isn't one of those professions that our culture celebrated or, even acknowledged.
It's like, you should say, Mom, you're forever memorialized in this book. Do you realize that?
Yes. And, I think that's also, she's a very private person. It was very unnerving for her. I'm the first one in my family to do anything like this. And let alone even in our small community, of people we know to do something like this. And I set my character up in the book, like no one would expect it from me. I was always the good girl trying to please everybody, following all the rules. But at the same time, it took me a really long time to give myself even permission to write or to try this career path.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I speak about that all the time.
Right.
And to even acknowledge that you're an artist or a writer, that was huge.
Goodness. It's so hard. It's so hard.
So can you tell me, being a writer, who other writers or poets or, artists that you can say have influenced you?
Yeah. I came to writing a little bit later. I knew I loved books and I loved storytelling, but I had no model of a creative writer. It never even crossed my mind as something that I could do. So in college, I majored in history, and I figured, I'll. And my brother had gone before me, and he'd kind of broken the mold of doing this science type of career, and he was becoming a professor. And so I thought, well, I'll just do that. That's a way to read and write and tell people stories.
That would have been my second choice. I love history.
Yeah. I mean, the overlap is so obvious, right? It is storytelling.
It is.
Yeah. And I still love history, and I think it really shapes our worldview, and it's so important to be literate, historically literate. And the kind of the trajectory of the book tells you the story of how I got off of this path of going to graduate school, and I was a stay-at-home mom with my firstborn child, and I was just feeling this tug, like this wish to write. I wanted to do something. I wanted to say something. I wanted to speak to this kind of terrible cultural moment that we were in as well. My son was born a year after 9/11. So the climate and the anti-Muslim sentiment was so high and so strong. And who knew then that it was only going to continue to get, that it wasn't going to get better.
Still be perpetuated. Yeah.
Yes. And then we were also dealing with the Iraq War, and coming from an Iraqi background, I wanted to do something, and I believe that I still believe that storytelling is an excellent way to debunk stereotypes and to build bridges. But, I didn't have the tools to write. So I actually asked my husband for one of my birthday to sign me up for like a 1-day writing course in the city. We were living in New York at the time.
Wow.
And that was like my first taste of this course in memoir. And then I kept going, I kept taking other classes. And so through those memoir classes, I started to get exposed to a lot of the more well-known memoirs of the time. So I was reading Mary Karr and Tobias Wolff and Augustin Burroughs, David Sedaris, the big names.
Sure.
And read all of that first. And then before I even attempted to write my own, I spent a long time then reading whatever I could get my hands on that was memoirs written by maybe Iraqi-American authors and Middle Eastern authors, and catching up, on what was being done. So there I had read memoirs by Tara Bahramanpour had a memoir, and Azadeh Moeni, and I picked up Jasmine Darznik's memoir. The Good Daughter was very influential to me.
Oh, okay.
And then I was also reading some more Arab-American fiction, and I read a lot of South Asian fiction, anything that was kind of giving me that roadmap of how you can tell this story of like a bicultural identity, but with complete authenticity.
Yes.
And then I was just gradually working as I was reading on my own story.
So after this, what are your current projects or your future goals? Are you going to stick with memoirs, or are you going to try to branch out to fiction? Or
I would like to do my next project in fiction. I think I need a break from memoir. So, the last 6 months have been straight promotion for me. I have not gotten a lot of creative work done. And one of the publicity consultants I worked with said this line to me that has stayed with me, and I'd love to share it because I think it's really helpful. She said, "It's very hard to create while you're trying to administrate." And it just took a lot of pressure off of me, because I was like, yes, that is exactly what I'm feeling. I was feeling very guilty that I hadn't been able to jump into my next project, but I also allowed myself to administrate a lot with this book. I got very caught up in the promotion and trying to do a lot of the publicity work for myself, a lot of pitching for myself. So, but the one project though that I did manage to do while I was promoting was I have an excerpt coming out in a middle grade anthology of Muslim authors about our holiday, our celebration of Eid, and that's coming out in 2020. And that was a joy. It was just a joy to take a break from the world of memoir, which is so interior and very thought heavy, and just to create something. And so I think it would be really healthy for me to do my next project in fiction, where I am creating a world rather than dissecting a world. Memoirs is very like unraveling kind of work where you're dissecting your experience, pulling it apart, and it's a different process.
Well, I'm sure the fiction process is going to pose other challenges as well. I'm sure.
Oh my goodness. It's, on the one hand, though, I feel like it's almost the constraints of memoir are almost helpful, right? Because you know what happened and you're working with what happened. But in fiction, anything can happen.
Anything can happen. And then you're going to have to choose.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And the little bit of fiction I have done, that has always been the struggle of, assigning parameters to the world you're creating.
Well, here you go. You know how memoirs, or creative nonfiction for that matter, hones on a particular experience, right? So, and then you kind of like get in there and really expand that experience. So I guess when you take that premise and kind of put that that set boundaries on a particular story fiction, it kind of works that way as well. So it, you kind of contain it and not have it so broad,
Yes. You can apply that kind of thematic limitation.
Yeah, it's cool. So now I'd like to, I know I've asked all my guests about, do you have any set routines? I know you say you write in the morning or when your children are in school. Are there any other set routines or?
Yes. So I've had this routine for some time now where I'm quite diligent when my kids are in school, and I force myself to not deal with anything house related or that this is my writing time. And I try not to answer emails that are otherwise related. But I will say this year has been off for me, because I've been doing all this promotion stuff. Mm-hmm. But this wasn't the best routine. I would start by answering work, like writing related emails in the morning. Yep. And then when I was done with that, had that put away, I would do some journal writing in a notebook. I felt like was a very important part of my creative process, is that I would do something generative before I got to the computer. And then also, like, I really believe in that connecting pen to paper, that it taps into a different kind of voice. Right. And then it
I wrote about that in a blog post. Yes, about how important it is to keep journals. I mean, it doesn't have to be related to anything you're doing or writing.
And I also look at it as a place to empty whatever clutter might be in my mind that might distract me from work. And sometimes I'm just scribbling quickly, like what's bothering me, just so I can focus a little bit. And only then would I go back to my laptop and start to do, whatever.
Good. Well, yeah, I have that problem. I get caught up. I go on the computer, I got to do this, and then lo and behold, I'm researching on something that's totally, and then you get into this whole, you wasted almost half the day on nothing.
I say that like that's my ideal, but definitely, I would have those days too where it's like you couldn't get off the computer, or like you said, you started researching something, and it, because even for Memoir,
down another path that's like so totally unrelated.
Even for Memoir, like I would research little things to remind myself of places I had been, to get certain details right. And so it was, and then I know that exactly that feeling of, I wasted the entire afternoon. But I don't know, I feel like the stall work that we do, that we call wasting, is almost like necessary. I hate it. I wish I could cut it out of the routine, but somehow it's almost like,
you know what? That's a great way to look at it, that it is necessary. Now, before I've been fighting it, like, or feeling guilty, or, loathing it. But I like that. If you accept it, like, it's just
part
of it.
It's part of it. I mean, what I regret about it is that sometimes I'll spend so much time in this writer warm-up stage that by the time I get deep into the manuscript and I wish I had more time to work, that was when I would usually have to close the computer and go pick up my kids or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and question. Now, does your husband view your writing process more seriously now that you're a published author?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I mean, he was very nervous as well, nervous about the book coming out. He asked me to change his name, and then which I did. I changed his name. I changed all of his relatives' names just to make it a little bit less Googleable. And it's really funny because people are totally Googling, because when I put my name in, to search whatever publicity things I'm dealing with, you know how it'll prompt you? One of the things is Huda Al-Marashi husband. So I know people are looking for him online.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of creepy, right? I would never thought of that, but then that makes sense, because people, and then, especially like in Wikipedia, you see, such and such husband, children. It's like, oh my goodness.
And I've been really careful. I very purposely don't post any pictures with my kids. I just want to grant them whatever space and buffer that they might want from my story. But, so I was worried about when the book came out, how would he feel? I imagine that he wasn't going to tell his coworkers or share that part of our life with anybody. He knew that he would try to keep it quiet, but no, he hasn't. He's been really proud, and he's told.
Proud. Oh, awesome.
Of course. Co-workers brought them out to my events, and he Googles me all the time, trying to see what the latest things come up, and and what really helped is seeing people's response. And I don't think readers understand what a gift their reading can be for an author too, because some of the I happened to get like a really beautiful review in the Washington Post, and now just recently I got another really wonderful review in the Vita Review, and I feel like these things have almost shown my family what I did. And
you're legit. You're a legit writer.
Giving them a way to see, this is what this work is doing in the world.
Yes.
That it has some value. And I couldn't be more grateful for that. Even the positive reviews on Amazon, I don't think people even realize that authors' families are going and looking these things up, but they do. And my husband tracks all of these things. But it helps. It helps to see.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
And it's the same question I ask also. Do you do other art forms or forms of expression?
I don't. And I wish I did. And I've never been somebody who does any handiwork. And I really wish I had something, because I think it would be really great to be distracted with something. But I will tell you the funniest thing that I found my way into by accident is my youngest spent some time going to a Waldorf school, and in Waldorf schools, part of that, like the culture of the Waldorf schools, felting, and I'd never seen that craft, and I'd never heard of it. But I thought those little things that they were felting were so cute.
They are cute.
And so then I Googled online how to do it, and I ordered.
I almost wanted to be a elementary art teacher, because I love those things. I love those little things that they make.
It's so I'm not very good, but I have on occasion felted little bunnies. I just did a caterpillar the other day that I'm quite proud of.
Well, you never know. You might have your own Etsy page with all that stuff.
The funny part in all of this is my mom is the most crafty person. She can make anything and any craft out of anything. And so she always thought it was so funny that there was nothing. I had nothing, but this little felting thing, she's taken so much pride in it, because it's look, you do have something. You can make a little felt bunny.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great learning about you and your book. Congratulations on that. And please keep in touch, because I'd love to see what your future works come out, and see what you're doing.
Thank you, Christina. I really love this conversation. It's really nice also to talk about things that are a little bit outside just the straight book promotion, and to discuss, the craft and a little bit more about writing.
Well, yeah, and a little bit more about, you also as a human being.
It was a lot of fun. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. If you can give us a short synopsis about it, and then we'll close out, just to give them an idea.
Yeah. So First Comes Marriage tells the story of my marriage. I met my husband when I was 6 years old. We met. Our fathers were both neurologists who went to medical school with each other in Baghdad, and then they were reunited at a meeting in California. Neither one of them knew that they had both immigrated to the U.S. And we clung to this family. They were the only other Iraqi-American family we knew in the U.S. And it's the story of how we came to get engaged and me trying to unravel what was our story. Did we have an arranged marriage, or did we really come together ourselves? And how I came to reconcile these more traditional notions of love with Western romantic culture.
Great. Yeah. Well, definitely worthy of a read.
Thanks, Christina.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Huda.
Bye.
Bye.